By 6 o'clock that evening, Pool Karen was trending on 3 different social media platforms. The security footage of her floating meditation had been leaked, edited, and transformed into a viral sensation complete with dramatic music and commentary from self-proclaimed body language experts. Karen sat in her living room, laptop open, scrolling through increasingly absurd interpretations of her pool incident. One TikTok video had garnered 2 million views with the caption, HOA Karen FAKES drowning for attention. You won't believe what happens next. This is character assassination, she muttered, clicking on another video. A teenager with purple hair was providing commentary. So like, this lady is literally the president of her HOA, right? And she's out here pretending to be dead in her pool while her neighbors are freaking out. That's some next-level narcissistic behavior. Her doorbell rang. Karen peeked through the blinds to see Robert Sterling standing on her porch, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie askew. "Robert," she said, opening the door, "you look terrible." "Karen, we have a problem. Several problems, actually." He pushed past her into the living room. "Have you seen the news?" "I've seen the social media circus, yes. Not just social media. Channel 7 ran a segment during the evening news. They're calling you the HOA president who cried wolf." Karen's blood ran cold. "They used my name? They used your name, your address, and aerial footage of your house." The report had actually said, and I quote, "This bizarre incident raises questions about the judgment and stability of neighborhood leadership." Karen sank into her armchair, the weight of the situation finally hitting her. How did this get so out of control? "It gets worse," Robert continued. "I've been fielding calls all afternoon. The Hendersons want to call an emergency board meeting to discuss your fitness for office. The Patels are threatening to sue for emotional distress caused by the false alarm. And Mrs. Chen claims she's developed anxiety from watching the surveillance footage." Mrs. Chen watches those cameras like they're her personal soap opera. She's the one who caused this mess. That's not how the neighbors see it, Karen. They see an HOA president who wasted city resources and traumatized the community for what appears to be a publicity stunt. Karen's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Karen Pemberton, the pool Karen from the videos?" "Who is this?" "This is Jessica Martinez from Inside Edition. We'd love to do an exclusive interview about your experience today. We understand you've been receiving criticism, and we'd like to give you a chance to tell your side of the story." Karen looked at Robert, who was shaking his head vigorously. "I'm not interested," she said and hung up. "Good," Robert said. "The last thing we need is more media attention." But Karen's mind was already racing. Maybe an interview wasn't such a bad idea. Maybe it was time to take control of the narrative, to remind people that she dedicated 3 years of her life to maintaining property values and community standards. Maybe it was time to remind them why they'd elected her in the first place. "Robert," she said slowly, "what if we used this situation to our advantage?" "Karen, no. Whatever you're thinking, no. Hear me out. Everyone's talking about me, right? Everyone knows who I am now. What if we turn this into a platform to discuss the real issues in our community? The property violations, the lack of community engagement, Karen, you're trending on social media as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. This is not the kind of attention that helps our cause." Her phone rang again. This time it was a local number. "Hello? Mrs. Pemberton. This is David Kim from the Willowbrook Heights Property Management Company. We need to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. There are some concerns about the association's public image that we need to address." Karen's hand tightened on the phone. Property Management Company meant serious business. They were the ones who could actually remove her from office. "Of course, David. When would be convenient?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. And Mrs. Pemberton, you might want to bring a lawyer." The sound of sirens pierced the suburban tranquility like a knife through butter. Karen stood in her driveway, dripping pool water onto the pristine concrete, watching as 3 fire trucks, 2 ambulances, and what appeared to be half the county's emergency response team descended upon Willowbrook Heights. "Ma'am, are you Karen Pemberton?" A paramedic approached, his equipment bag bouncing against his hip. Yes, and this is completely unnecessary. We received multiple reports of a possible drowning. He interrupted, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. Are you experiencing any chest pain? Difficulty breathing? Karen's face flushed red beneath her swim cap. I was meditating. In my own pool, there's no law against floating. Fire Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression shifting from concern to annoyed. Mrs. Pemberton, you were reported as being face down and motionless in the water for over 20 minutes. Your neighbors thought you were dead. Well, I'm clearly not dead, Karen snapped, water still dripping from her elbows. And I'd like to know exactly which neighbor called this in without speaking to me first. Multiple neighbors, ma'am. The footage from your surveillance system showed. My surveillance system. Karen's voice rose an octave. Who authorized access to my cameras? Captain Rodriguez consulted his tablet. According to our records, you designated Mrs. Chen as a neighborhood watch coordinator with monitoring privileges. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had indeed given Mrs. Chen access to the cameras, but that was supposed to be for actual emergencies, not for spying on her pool activities. Mrs. Pemberton, the paramedic tried again. We still need to check your vitals. You were underwater for extended periods. I was not underwater, I was floating. There's a difference. A crowd had gathered. Karen spotted Mrs. Chen hovering near the Hendersons' mailbox, her face a mask of feigned concern. The Martinez family stood in their driveway, their 3 children gawking at the spectacle. Even the reclusive Mr. Jameson from the corner house had emerged, his newspaper still clutched in his weathered hands. Karen! Meredith pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with excitement. I'm so glad you're okay. When I saw you floating there, I just knew something was wrong. Nothing was wrong until everyone started overreacting, Karen said through gritted teeth. But you looked so peaceful, too peaceful, if you know what I mean. Karen's neighbors began to murmur among themselves. She caught fragments of their conversations. Always said she was odd, who floats face down for 20 minutes. Probably planned this for attention. The worst part wasn't the embarrassment. Karen had weathered plenty of neighborhood drama in her 3 years as HOA president. The worst part was the realization that her own surveillance system had betrayed her. Every camera angle, every recorded second of her pool meditation was now part of an official emergency response report. Captain Rodriguez, Karen said, forcing her voice to remain steady, I appreciate your concern, but as you can see, there's no emergency here. I'd like to request that your team clear the area so my neighbors can return to their afternoon activities. Of course, ma'am. But I do need to ask, is floating face down something you do regularly? Karen's jaw clenched. I don't see how my swimming habits are any of your business. It's just that if this is a regular occurrence, we might want to notify the monitoring service to avoid future false alarms. The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. Karen realized that her peaceful pool meditation, the one thing in her life that brought her genuine tranquility, had just been classified as a potential public safety hazard. As the emergency vehicles began their departure, Karen stood alone in her driveway, watching her neighbors disperse. Each one avoided her gaze, but she could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Her phone buzzed. A text from her vice president, Robert Sterling. Saw the news footage. Are you okay? Also, we need to talk about tonight's meeting. News footage. Karen's stomach dropped. This was about to get much worse. The footage was devastating, and not in the way Karen had expected. Jessica Martinez from Inside Edition had somehow obtained the complete security recording from multiple camera angles, and what it revealed was far more complex than the viral clips suggested. Karen watched the video on her laptop in her car outside the community center, having excused herself from the meeting. The unedited footage showed not just her peaceful floating meditation, but the full 23 minutes of her neighbors' reactions. Mrs. Chen's initial panic was genuine. She'd actually fallen out of her chair when she first spotted Karen motionless in the pool. But what happened next was telling. Instead of calling 911 immediately, Mrs. Chen had called her husband, then her sister, then taken screenshots to text to her book club. Only after consulting with multiple people did she finally call emergency services. Meredith's reaction was even more revealing. The cameras caught her standing at her fence, watching Karen float, for a full 6 minutes before she started screaming. During those 6 minutes, she'd called someone on her phone. Karen could see her laughing and gesturing toward the pool. But the most damning footage showed what happened after the emergency vehicles left. The neighbors who had just spent the afternoon, concerned for Karen's safety, were now gathered in small groups, laughing and pointing at her house. Someone, it looked like Mr. Thompson, was actually reenacting her floating pose while the others laughed. Karen's phone rang. "Mrs. Pemberton, this is Jessica Martinez. Did you see the footage?" "I saw it. We're running the full story tomorrow morning. The real story, about how your neighbors turned a false alarm into a social media spectacle. Would you like to comment?" Karen looked back at the community center, where her neighbors were voting on whether to remove her from office. "Yes, I'd like to comment." 20 minutes later, Karen walked back into the meeting with her phone in her hand. The vote was about to begin when she cleared her throat. "Before you vote," she said, "I think everyone should see this." She connected her phone to the room's projector and played the unedited security footage. The room fell silent as they watched their own behavior unfold on screen. The laughter, the photo taking, the reenactments, all of it captured in high definition. "This is what happened yesterday," Karen said quietly. "Yes, I was floating in my pool. Yes, it looked unusual. But what you're seeing here is how quickly concern turned into entertainment, and how entertainment turned into public humiliation." Mrs. Chen's face was pale. "Karen, I didn't know the cameras were recording all of this. That's the point, isn't it? None of us knew we were being recorded. None of us thought about how our actions might be misinterpreted, or how quickly a misunderstanding could spiral out of control." Sarah Martinez stood up. "Karen, I'm sorry. I didn't know about the social media posts. I was angry about the fence situation." "I understand," Karen said. "And maybe it's time we all had a conversation about what kind of community we actually want to live in." The vote was postponed. Instead, the neighbors found themselves in their first real discussion about community standards, surveillance, privacy, and the difference between leadership and control. 2 weeks later, Karen was still HOA president, but with a dramatically different approach. The surveillance system was reduced to common areas only. The fence regulations were revised to include safety exemptions, and Karen's pool meditation schedule was posted on the community bulletin board, partly as a joke, partly as a genuine attempt at transparency. But late at night, when she floated in her pool under the stars, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the cameras were still watching. Not the mechanical ones, those were gone, but the human ones, the ones that never stopped recording, never stopped judging, never stopped waiting for the next moment of weakness to transform into entertainment. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Karen, this is Tom Bradley from the Pine Ridge HOA. We saw your story on the news. Our community is having some leadership challenges, and we'd love to talk to you about consulting. Are you available?" Karen smiled, deleted the message, and went back to floating. Some lessons, she'd learned, were worth more than any amount of consulting fees. But in the morning, she'd probably call Tom Bradley back. After all, Willowbrook Heights wasn't the only community that could use a little help understanding the difference between standards and surveillance, between leadership and control. The pool was just the beginning. The emergency HOA board meeting that Thursday evening was standing room only. Karen had never seen the community center so packed, not even during the great mailbox controversy of 2023. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their shared fascination with her public humiliation. Karen sat at the head table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching as Robert called the meeting to order. The agenda was simple: a vote of no confidence in her leadership. "Before we begin," Karen said, standing up, "I'd like to address the elephant in the room." "You mean the whale in the pool?" someone called out from the back. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. I understand that yesterday's incident has caused some concern about my judgment. I want to assure everyone that I take my responsibilities as your HOA president very seriously. Seriously enough to waste taxpayer money on a fake emergency? This from Janet Williams, whose wind chimes Karen had cited for noise violations just last month. It wasn't fake, Karen said firmly. I was practicing a legitimate swimming technique in my own pool. The emergency response was triggered by a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that could have been avoided if you'd simply told someone what you were doing, said Mr. Henderson, his voice carrying the weight of his 70-plus years. Leaders communicate, Karen. They don't operate in secret. The comment stung because it was true. Karen had chosen pool meditation specifically because it was her one private refuge from the constant demands of community leadership. She'd never considered that her privacy might be interpreted as secrecy. Mrs. Pemberton, called out a familiar voice. Karen turned to see Mrs. Chen standing near the coffee station, her walker decorated with a small American flag. I want to apologize for my part in this situation. I was genuinely concerned for your safety. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I appreciate that. But Mrs. Chen continued, I also want to ask why you gave me access to those cameras if you didn't want community oversight of your activities. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen had installed the surveillance system after a series of minor vandalism incidents, positioning herself as the neighborhood's protector. She'd distributed camera access to select residents, calling it community policing and neighborhood watch engagement. The cameras were installed for security purposes, Karen said carefully, to protect our property values and maintain our community standards. But not to watch you. This from Marcus Thompson, whose lawn height she'd measured with a ruler just 2 weeks ago. That's not the point. Isn't it though? Marcus stood up, his voice gaining strength. You install cameras to watch us. You measure our grass. You inspect our mailboxes. You fine us for leaving our trash cans up 5 minutes too long. But when those same cameras catch you doing something unusual, suddenly it's a privacy violation. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen felt the room shifting against her, but she couldn't figure out how to stop it. I maintain community standards because that's what I was elected to do, she said, her voice rising. Property values in Willowbrook Heights have increased by 18% since I took office. Our community is cleaner, safer, and more organized than it's ever been. At what cost? This from a voice Karen didn't recognize. She turned to see a young woman in the back, someone she didn't remember from the neighborhood. I'm sorry, do you live here? I'm Sarah Martinez. I live on Elm Street with my husband and 3 kids. You know, the family whose fence you've been trying to get torn down for the past 6 months? Karen's stomach dropped. The Martinez fence was one of her most contentious ongoing cases. Your fence extends 14 inches beyond the property line. It's a clear violation of community standards. It's a safety barrier that keeps our toddler from running into the street, Sarah shot back. But you've never asked why we built it. You've never considered that maybe, just maybe, some violations exist for good reasons. The room fell silent. Karen looked around at faces that had once looked to her for leadership, now looking at her with something between disappointment and anger. I think, said Robert quietly, we should proceed with the vote. Karen's heart pounded as she realized her 3 years of dedicated service were about to be erased by one afternoon in a swimming pool. But just as Robert was about to call for the vote, Karen's phone buzzed with a text that changed everything. Channel 7 just got security footage of your neighbor's real reactions to your drowning. You need to see this. J. Martinez, Inside Edition. Karen Pemberton floated face down in her backyard pool, arms spread wide like a starfish, her floral bikini a bright contrast against the azure water. The surveillance camera mounted on her neighbor's fence captured every second of what appeared to be a tragedy in the making. Oh my God, Karen! Shrieked Meredith from next door, her voice cracking like a teenage boy's. She fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it into her own pool. 911, I need. Karen's head popped up with the grace of a surfacing walrus. What's all the screaming about? Meredith's face cycled through confusion, relief, and then pure rage. You were floating face down. I thought you were dead. I was practicing my dead man's float, Karen said, adjusting her swim cap with the casualness of someone discussing the weather. It's excellent for meditation and spinal alignment. You gave me a heart attack. Karen paddled to the pool's edge, her movements creating small waves that caught the afternoon sun. That's hardly my fault. Maybe you should mind your own business instead of watching me swim. But Meredith wasn't the only one watching. As president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, Karen had insisted on the installation of security cameras throughout the neighborhood. What she hadn't anticipated was becoming the star of her own surveillance network. At that very moment, 3 houses down, elderly Mrs. Chen was reviewing the camera feeds on her tablet, a responsibility Karen had bestowed upon the retirees in the community. Mrs. Chen's arthritic fingers trembled as she fumbled for her emergency contact list. Harold, come quick, she called to her husband. Karen's been in the pool for 23 minutes without moving. Harold shuffled over, his slippers making soft swooshing sounds on the hardwood floor. Maybe she's dead. Would serve her right after what she did to the Johnsons' rose bushes. Don't say that, Mrs. Chen gasped, though her tone suggested she found the idea less horrifying than she should. I'm calling emergency services. Meanwhile, Karen remained blissfully unaware that her innocent pool meditation had triggered a neighborhood-wide panic. She executed another perfect dead man's float, her mind focused on the HOA board meeting scheduled for tonight. The Martinez family's unauthorized fence extension wasn't going to address itself. Her phone, sitting on the pool deck, buzzed with an incoming call, then another, and another. Karen, Meredith's voice carried over the fence again. Your phone's ringing. Karen sighed, breaking her peaceful pose. She'd specifically chosen this time for her pool meditation because most neighbors were at work, and she could think clearly about the 17 violations she'd documented this week alone. The Thompsons' lawn was a 1/4 inch too high. The Patels' mailbox was the wrong shade of black, and don't even get her started on the Williams family's wind chimes. As she reached for her phone, the screen showed 14 missed calls and 23 text messages. The most recent message made her blood run cold. Fire Department en route to your address. Stay calm. Karen's perfect posture crumbled. This was not how she planned to spend her afternoon.